trouble slinks into the night the moment Archie picks up the phone, a call that will pull the brownstone straight into danger and lies. Where in the world are you listening from tonight? And subscribe so you never miss upcoming mysteries. Nero Wolfe and the Case of the Raging Inspector. I don't usually keep track of how many times the brownstone has gone quiet enough to hear my own pulse, but that night it was the kind of stillness you could lean on. The sort that belonged to the space between a held breath and a bad idea. I'd just finished typing up Wolfe's notes from the afternoon, a tedious list of botanical terms that could have doubled as an alien dialect, when the silence broke like a pane of glass. A single, savage ring from the telephone sliced through the office, sharp enough to make me sit up straighter than Wolfe at a tax audit. Now, I've heard phones ring at all hours. In our line of work, the telephone has the decency of a burglar. It rarely knocks before entering. But this particular ring didn't sound like a request for service. It sounded like a threat. The second ring came quicker, more insistent, the auditory equivalent of a shove in the chest. By the third, I figured whoever it was had earned the privilege of my annoyance. I lifted the receiver. Nero Wolfe's office. Archie Goodwin at your service, unless you're selling Bibles or encyclopedias. What came back wasn't the grunt I expected. It was Inspector Kramer's voice, tight, raw, and carrying the rough edge of a man whose night had already taken a long walk off a short pier. Goodwin, Wolfe. Now, put him on. You sound, I said, leaning back, like a man trying to strangle the phone with his bare hands. Archie, Wolfe barked from his chair without even turning around. His hearing may be selective, but insult detection is one sense he keeps razor sharp. If it is Mr. Kramer, put him through. Kramer didn't wait for pleasantries. Wolfe, listen, I'm coming over. Don't duck me. Wolfe's brows pulled together like two diplomats refusing a handshake. Inspector, it is nearly midnight. I do not receive clients during... I'm not a client. I'm a man in trouble. I'm already in the damn cab. You'll hear the bell, he said, and then the line went dead, the phone clicking like a threat hanging in the air. Wolfe gave the receiver a baleful stare as though it had personally insulted his ancestry. Archie, why did you permit that? Because telling Kramer no tonight sounded like the quickest way to get the door kicked in. He made a noise halfway between a sigh and an oath in Serbo-Croatian, which meant he was at least 2 notches more irritated than usual. His bulk shifted slightly, forearms planting on the chair arms. Very well. Prepare for his arrival. And, Archie. He paused long enough to make me look at him. Do restrain your flippancy. The man sounded unwell. That was Wolfe's closest approximation to compassion on short notice, and I didn't take it lightly. At 11:52 p.m., the bell rang with such force the doorframe quivered. Kramer didn't barge in, true to the promise of his call, but he did hammer the bell like he expected fire to burst through the keyhole. I opened the door to find him pacing the stoop, hat crushed in one fist, cigar unlit in the other, a bad omen if ever I saw one. Goodwin. He brushed past me and stood in the office doorway, chest rising like a boiler about to burst. His usually square posture had a tilt to it tonight, as if the ground itself had gotten unreliable. Wolfe gestured him in with a mild sweep of the hand. Inspector, you will sit. You are winded. I'm not winded. I'm furious. But he sat. That alone told me this night wasn't normal. Up close, Kramer looked like he'd aged 5 years since breakfast. His tie was crooked, collar sagging like a wilted flower, and the hollows under his eyes had deepened like an unspoken confession. He didn't bother with small talk. Wolfe, a man has been murdered. A big one. A candidate for DA. What of it? Wolfe asked, voice placid. Kramer reached into his coat and tossed a folded sheet onto Wolfe's desk. Someone left that at the scene. I picked it up. A single line typed on paper old enough to have arthritis. Inspector Kramer killed him. Typed on a ribbon that was almost dry, with a rough tear along the right edge, ragged enough to look like the typewriter had been gnawing on itself. Cute, I murmured. If you need a place to hide, Inspector, we rent bunks now. Kramer shot me a look that could have peeled varnish. Goodwin, do me a favour and be quiet. Wolfe cleared his throat, just enough to reset the room's balance of power. Mr. Kramer, I assume this is a fabrication. You assume right. I didn't kill anybody, but I walked into the campaign headquarters 5 minutes after the body was found, and now the political vultures want me for breakfast. Then perhaps, Wolfe suggested gently. You should eat before they do. This isn't a joke, Kramer's voice cracked. The press is already circling. The DA's office is jittery. Half the city council is whispering I had motive. Me! I won't say sympathy hit me like a freight train. I'm not that sentimental, but I did feel something pinch just below the ribs. Kramer was a bull, but tonight he was a bull, wearied by too many battles. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled. Tell us the particulars. Kramer swallowed hard. He was found slumped over his own campaign table. Blunt force trauma, no weapon yet. His staff claims they heard nothing. The note was sitting beside the body. And you, Wolfe said, were the first police authority to arrive. Yeah, which apparently makes me a murderer now. I looked at him. Inspector, whoever typed this note might as well have drawn a moustache on the Statue of Liberty. The whole thing screams amateur hour. That amateur, Kramer growled, is about to ruin my life. Wolfe reached for the note. His large fingers handled it delicately. Typed on a machine with a failing ribbon, and this tear at the margin. He examined it as if it were an orchid petal. Careless, deliberate, he shook his head. A clumsy effort. Kramer slumped. Not much, but enough that the chair protested. Wolfe, I need help. And don't start with your routine about retaining fees and procedures. I didn't come as a client. I came because I trust your brain, damn it. That admission seemed to cost him dearly. Wolfe's expression softened, only by a fraction, but I caught it. Inspector, he said, voice low, you are not a fool, nor are you a murderer. Sit. Kramer blinked. I am sitting. Then remained so. Archie, beer. I raised a brow. It's past orchid hours, but just before bed. You sure about this? For Mr. Kramer, Wolfe said. A concession. That told me everything I needed to know about how seriously he was taking this. I got the beer and poured it into a chilled glass. Kramer accepted it with hands that trembled just enough to reveal the truth he wouldn't say out loud. He was scared. So what now? I asked, leaning on the desk with casual bravado. You want us to find who typed the accusation? Or who murdered the DA candidate? Or both in a single convenient package? Kramer exhaled smoke he hadn't even inhaled. Wolfe, someone's playing me. I need the truth before the press crucifies me, and before the department starts looking at me sideways. Wolfe closed his eyes briefly, the way he does when he's tasting a problem like wine. His shoulders rose, fell. Then he opened his eyes again. I will take the case, he said simply. Kramer let out a bark of relief so abrupt it startled even him. You will? Pro bono, Wolfe added. I almost dropped my jaw. Wolfe working for free was like a snowstorm in July, rare and possibly illegal. Why? Kramer asked, stunned. Wolfe's gaze drifted briefly toward me, then back at Kramer. Because injustice, Inspector, is a personal affront, and because I cannot abide the notion that incompetence, yours or others, be exploited so crudely. Gee, I said, if I ever get accused of homicide, I hope you're feeling this charitable. You, Wolfe replied, his lips twitching with something akin to a smile, would be less deserving. It took me a moment to decide whether that counted as an insult or endearment. With Wolfe, the line is narrow. Kramer stood, setting the empty glass down with a clunk. Some colour had returned to his face. All right, I'll get you what I can. Statements, lab reports, scene photos. But Wolfe, keep this tight. If the press gets wind you're investigating, they'll twist it into something ugly. Wolfe inclined his head. I will do nothing to exacerbate your plight. Kramer hesitated at the doorway. Thanks, both of you. After he left, the silence rushed back like tidewater. Wolfe looked at me with the faint gloom of a man who has just agreed to eat peas for a month. Archie, he said, we have acquired a storm. Yeah, I replied, turning off the desk lamp. And it's wearing a wrinkled suit and a badge. Wolfe tugged the bell cord. Fritz, the evening is concluded. Bring chamomile. And just like that, the first night of trouble settled into the brownstone, quiet, brooding, and ready to bloom. I've walked into plenty of offices where the atmosphere landed on me like damp laundry, but the DA candidate's headquarters that morning had something special, a smell that suggested ambition had been sweating in the walls overnight. The place sat on Madison Avenue with a glass front bright enough to blind a saint, plastered with patriotic posters promising integrity, justice, and the sort of leadership that always gets printed in bold caps. Inside was another story. The carpet had the worn look of a campaign running thin, and half the staff looked as if they'd misplaced their souls somewhere under the Xerox machine. I stepped through the door at 9:30 sharp, carrying nothing but my notebook, my charm, and Wolfe's unspoken reminder not to antagonize anyone unless strategically necessary. I fully intended to ignore that last part. The first to spot me was a tall woman with steel-coloured eyes, a suit sharp enough to shave with, and a mouth shaped as if smiling had been outlawed. She came at me like a ledger with legs. "You must be Mr. Goodwin," she said. "I'm Miss Hartley, campaign manager." I nodded. "The pleasure, I assure you, is evenly distributed." "Inspector Kramer said you'd be coming," she replied without warmth. "He also said you'd need access to the late Mr. Talbot's office. I assume you won't make a nuisance of yourself." "I assume nothing," I said cheerfully. "It keeps life surprising." She didn't like that, which I marked down as a win. She escorted me toward the inner suite, a stretch of glass-partitioned rooms arranged like a maze designed by someone who hated straight lines. Staffers whispered as we passed, eyes flicking to my face and then away, the way people look at a man who might be carrying contagion. Political contagion is worse than the medical kind. It spreads faster and ruins reputations, not lungs. "Before we begin," I told them over my shoulder, "I'd like a show of hands. How many of you habitually accuse the NYPD of homicide before breakfast?" Half a dozen startled expressions, one nervous chuckle, and one intern nearly dropped a stack of donor envelopes. Good enough. Talbot's office was a mess even before I entered. The kind of mess that suggested someone had tried to clean up after panicking. The desk drawers were empty, the blinds crooked, and the faint tang of cigarette smoke clung to the air with the loyalty of a bad alibi. Hartley gestured toward the chair. "You may look around, but do not remove anything." "Ma'am," I said, "I only steal hearts and pencils." She left with stiff shoulders, and two staffers lingered in the hall pretending not to listen. I scanned the room. Campaign posters curled at the edges. A calendar lay open to the previous week, appointments scratched out, some in red pencil. On the corner of the desk was a stack of leaflets advertising Talbot's final speech, a generic composition that wouldn't win any awards for typography. One had a torn corner, jagged and coarse. The texture triggered a jolt of recognition. The accusation note Kramer showed us last night had a similar torn edge. I held the leaflet lightly, careful not to leave smudges. A photostat would do the job. The original stayed put. I slipped into Talbot's chair and began checking the drawers, finding nothing but dust and a bent paperclip that seemed to resent its own existence. A timid knock interrupted me. A skinny volunteer with a cowlick that defied gravity peeked inside. Mr. Goodwin?" he squeaked. "That's me," I said, "unless there's another handsome devil with my name." He swallowed. I saw someone last night, before the police got here." I motioned him inside. "Let's hear it." He perched on the edge of the chair like a sparrow anticipating a cat. "I was sorting pamphlets in the hall," he said. "I heard footsteps, then saw a man slip out the back stairwell. He looked wrong, like he didn't belong." "Describe wrong." "He was tall, wore a dark coat, didn't look at me, just kept going down the stairs fast." I asked a few more questions, shoe colour, hair, build, but the kid's memory had the consistency of pudding. Still, the stairwell detail mattered. It meant someone had slithered out before Law showed up. After he left, I typed myself a quick note on Talbot's machine, just a harmless line for future comparison. The ribbon was fresh, but filing it mentally as data wouldn't hurt. Then I headed back to Hartley, who regarded me as though I'd rearranged her molecules. "I'll need to see the photostats of Talbot's appointment book," I said, pretending I was speaking of something far more exciting than appointments. "That's confidential." "You're cooperating with the NYPD," I reminded her, "and by extension, me." She sighed with enough force to power a windmill. "Fine, come with me." In the records room, she unlocked a cabinet, pulling out a binder thick enough to stun an ox. She handed it over without touching me, as though my fingers carried some sort of bureaucratic plague. I examined the entries: donor meetings, speech rehearsals, strategy huddles. A name popped up repeatedly in the last 2 weeks: Marlin Pierce, the rival candidate's strategist. Interesting. I set the binder down and said, "I'll need photostats of last week." "Evan," Hartley barked. A staffer practically sprinted in. Photostat these pages. I turned to Evan. Relax. I'm not the one who murdered anybody. He went pale. Maybe the remark wasn't as helpful as I intended, but it got the job done. Within minutes I had the copies. I made a final sweep of the office. No bloodstains. This had been a blunt force job. No weapon left behind. But the campaign's frantic energy screamed that someone knew more than they were saying. Outside, I phoned the brownstone from a pay booth on Madison. Wolfe's office, I said. Archie Goodwin speaking, busy as a hummingbird. Archie, Wolfe's voice drawled, report. I laid out the essentials, the photostats, the stairwell runner, the torn leaflet. Wolfe grunted at the political motif, dismissing it with the disdain of a man allergic to public service. Politics, he said, is human frailty at scale. That's a catchy slogan, I replied. You'd make a fine mayor if they held meetings at 1 p.m. over lamb cassoulet. He snorted. Pfui, you just inappropriately. Do continue. Before I could, the line clicked. Another incoming call on the extension. Fritz appeared silently to inform me with one soft gesture that it was Inspector Kramer. Kramer sounded like he'd been dragged across gravel. Goodwin, put Wolfe on. I patched him through. Wolfe, Kramer said, we got something. Lab says the accusation notes ribbon matches a typewriter model used in Talbot's headquarters. Same tear pattern, same texture. Predictable, Wolfe replied. Inspector, you are not to be bullied by circumstance. Hold fast. Kramer let out a breath that might once have been a thank you. I'll send over the lab report. And Goodwin, keep digging. I brought my shovel, I assured him. Back inside the glass building, the mood had thickened. Staff whispered like conspirators in a cheap melodrama. Hartley approached me again, arms folded. Finished? For now, I said. One last question. Was Talbot's safe intact when he left last night? She stiffened slightly. His safe? Campaign funds, sensitive documents, anything requiring a lock. Hartley hesitated. His accountant checks the contents daily, but this morning, well, it looked tampered with. Define tampered. She glanced at the closed office door. Empty. The word hung in the air like smoke. Someone had cleaned out Talbot's safe after he died. That made the murder secondary. The first crime had been theft. It also meant the killer, or accomplice, was no amateur. Emptying a safe wasn't impulse. It was business. I tipped my hat to Hartley. Thanks. I'll be in touch. Probably when you least want me. On my way out, I tossed a final wisecrack at the staff. If anyone else feels like accusing the NYPD of homicide, take a number. A few gasps, one stifled laugh, and I was gone. Outside, the city hummed with its usual blend of indifference and sin. I hailed a cab back to the brownstone, my pocket heavy with photostats and my mind buzzing with possibilities. Someone had left a trail, typed notes, torn corners, stairwell escapes, and that trail now wound straight into Wolfe's domain. When I reached the brownstone, Wolfe was in his office, frowning at a newspaper as if the print had personally offended him. Report, he commanded without looking up. I laid the photostats on his desk. Talbot's safe was emptied after he died, and we've got a stairwell ghost with good timing. Wolfe's eyes narrowed a fraction. This is intolerable. For the killer, sure, I said. For us, just another Tuesday. He glared, but only mildly. Fetch me beer. Already ahead of you. As I handed him the chilled glass, he murmured, This grows ugly, Archie. You noticed, I replied. Shall I cancel dinner? He shot me a look of slow-burning reproach. Your levity is occasionally a tonic. Do not make it poison. I saluted him with the bottle opener. Yes, sir. In the corner of the office, the orchid clock ticked toward 11, reminding us that even murder had to respect Wolfe's schedule. As I filed the photostats away, Wolfe leaned back, eyes half-lidded. Archie, someone has orchestrated this with skill. The empty safe is the pivot. You think so? I know so. And the next step? He closed his eyes. Lunch. I let out a low whistle. You and your priorities. But beneath that routine lay tension. Thick, coiled, ready. Something big was coming, and we both felt it. When a man in a pinstripe suit opens a ledger with the delicacy of a surgeon exposing a rib cage, you know you're in for a lively morning. That was my first impression of Milton Grady, the late Talbot's campaign accountant, and it only improved when he looked up at me as though I were an audit wrapped in human skin. The smoke-tinged office around us throbbed with the clatter of typewriters, ringing phones, and the steady pulse of political doom. Campaigns always smelled like trouble when they were losing. This one smelled like trouble when its candidate had just been murdered. "Mr. Goodwin," Grady said, adjusting his rimless spectacles. "I'm cooperating under protest." "Sure," I told him, "but if you do it with enthusiasm, I might faint. Let's keep your workload light." He sniffed at that, which I took as a sign of budding friendship. He motioned me toward a leather chair that had all the comfort of a disciplinary bench. Grady opened a thick binder and flipped to a tab marked Private Files. Confidential. My pulse perked up. The safe contents. "These were inside Mr. Talbot's wall safe," Grady said, tapping the page with a rigid finger. "Donor files, financial letters, receipts, and a collection of investigative reports Mr. Talbot had commissioned through a private firm." Investigating whom? His own staff. Some of them, at least. Politics breeds paranoia, Mr. Goodwin. Talbot was trying to protect himself. I leaned in, scanning the listed report titles. Most were routine checks. Financial stability, conflicts of interest, quiet background snooping. But one stood out. A thick packet labelled Pierce. Contributions and favours, marked with a red stamp, sensitive. "Pierce?" I asked. "As in Marlin Pierce, the rising star, golden jawline, New York's next political heirloom?" Grady's lips pressed into a grim mathematical line. "Yes. Talbot suspected bribery. Improper favours for donors. If this had gone public, Pierce would have been non-viable." "And now, with Talbot dead, Pierce is the front-runner," I said. "That warms the heart." Grady removed his spectacles, polished them with a handkerchief, and replaced them with military precision. Everything on that list was in the safe the night before the murder. I checked the contents personally. After he died, gone. All of it? All, except one empty folder labelled Staff Complaints. Whoever emptied it had a key or knew the combination. Which meant inside access. Never a comforting thought. I noted the names of staff with safe access, jotting them in my pocket notebook. Wolfe would want the list in triplicate and probably typed on vellum. A timid knock interrupted the accounting symphony. A PR aide, short woman, too much rouge, eyes darting like minnows, peeked inside. "Sorry," she said. "Ms. Hartley wants to know if—" I cut her off. "Tell me, sister, if lying were a campaign requirement, would you be elected governor tomorrow or just lieutenant?" She gasped. "What? Why would you—" "I'm gathering data," I said. "So far, your reaction is the most informative thing I've seen all day." She sputtered and fled the office like a startled quail. Grady's jaw dropped open in slow motion. "You enjoy unsettling people, don't you?" he asked. "Only professionally," I replied. "Now, about these reports. Who knew Talbot had them?" "Only a few staff members," he said. "The campaign manager, the deputy strategist, myself, and the man Talbot hired from outside to deliver the reports from the investigative agency." "A name?" Grady hesitated. "Barclay Trent." A familiar twinge of recognition pricked the back of my skull. "Tall fellow, expensive shoes, too much cologne." "That sounds like him." Sorrento could have been our stairwell phantom from the night of the murder. I made a mental note to tell Saul Panzer. Saul had a sixth sense for tracking men who smelled expensive. "Fine," I said, standing. "Now I need a photostat of the page listing access to that safe." "Mr. Goodwin," Grady protested, "these are confidential." "Talbot is deceased. Confidentiality is optional when homicide enters the chat. Photostat." Grady glowered but complied. I called Saul from the hallway phone. "Saul," I said, "find Barclay Trent. Long stride, maybe nervous, probably sweating guilt. He ran down a stairwell the night Talbot got killed." "Give me an hour," Saul said. He hung up before I could add a wisecrack. Back in the campaign suite, the tension had grown denser than cigar smoke. Staffers huddled in corners, whispering like schoolchildren who'd sneaked beyond the playground fence. From the window, I could see the reflection of my own frown. Not that it helped. I lifted the hallway phone again and called Wolfe. "Report, Archie," he said. His tone suggested he'd been interrupted while contemplating the sanctity of silence. The safe held donor files, payoff suspicions, private investigations, juicy enough to ruin Pierce, all gone. "I expected as much," Wolfe replied. "The leverage was removed to destroy Talbot's power. Who had access?" I read the list. When I reached Sorrento's name, Wolfe grunted, "Find him." "Saul's on it," I said. "But it's Manhattan. People vanish for sport." "A trifling objection," Wolfe said. "Return immediately with the list. I want to examine it." "Wolfe," I said, "I'm on the far side of Midtown. Traffic is slower than you rising from a chair." "Fui," he replied with enough dignity to fill a cathedral. "You asked," I said. I commanded. "Same difference." He hung up. That counted as affectionate friction in our relationship. Before leaving the building, I cornered Miss Hartley in the corridor. "Grady tells me the safe was emptied," I said. "You knew?" She stiffened. "I suspected, but until the police confirmed. Do you know who had access?" "No," she lied too quickly. Her eyes darted left. I need to get to a meeting." "Do that," I said. "Good luck." As she hustled away, I noticed the PR aide from earlier watching us with wide, nervous eyes. Red herring or the genuine article? Hard to tell. She looked like a woman who would confess to murder if you asked in the right tone. I exited the glass doors into the crisp morning air, flagged a cab, and gave the driver the brownstones' address. I was halfway there when Saul called. "Archie," he said mildly, "our stairwell friend checked into a Midtown hotel an hour ago. Name registered as Barclay Trent." "That's subtle," I snorted. "You tailing him now?" "I was," Saul said. "He just slipped out the service entrance." "Damn," I muttered. "He see you?" "No, he's scared, running." "Find him again. And Saul, be careful." "Always," he said, and hung up. I stared at the receiver, weighing possibilities. If Sorrento had the stolen reports, or worse, had killed Talbot, he wouldn't give Saul the slip for long, but panic made men unpredictable. Back at the brownstone at 12:46, I walked into the office to find Wolfe sitting behind his desk like a stone idol who disapproved of human activity. "You're early," he said. "Manhattan cab drivers have discovered acceleration," I said. "Miracles abound." I handed him the photostat. He adjusted his chair with a grunt and peered at the list. His eyes narrowed. "This is worse than I feared." "I was hoping you'd say better," I replied, "but pessimism is your charm." Before he could retort, the bell rang. Fritz appeared just long enough to say, "Inspector Kramer." Kramer entered without his usual stormfront energy. He looked tired. The lines on his forehead were carved deeper, and his cigar remained unlit in the corner of his mouth, a sign of true concern. "Wolfe," he said, voice low, "the press is running wild. They're saying the note proves I had motive, that I shut down Talbot's raids on union corruption. They're calling me the angry cop who snapped." "Idiocy," Wolfe said calmly. Kramer rubbed a hand across his face. "Maybe, but idiocy spreads fast in this town." "You have more sense than the press," Wolfe said, unexpectedly gentle. "You will endure." Kramer swallowed. "Thanks, I guess." He turned to me. "Goodwin, bring me anything you find, fast, before they bury me with headlines." He left without slamming the door. That alone told me the city was unraveling faster than his temper. Wolfe folded his hands, gaze stern. "Mr. Goodwin, we must find the truth before the city convicts a good man by fatigue." I nodded. "Then we'd better get moving." If there's one sound guaranteed to ruin a perfectly good morning in the brownstone, it's the rustle of newspapers arriving in bulk. When Lon Cohen shows up carrying half the city's print weight like Santa Claus with a backache, you can assume trouble is at least 3 headlines deep and rising. So when the bell rang at 9:07 a.m. and Fritz appeared in the office doorway to announce, "Mr. Cohen, sir," I braced for impact. Lon came in wearing his usual expression, weary courage and a smile just convincing enough to fool strangers. Under his arm he carried a stack of morning editions large enough to qualify as a structural hazard. Sunlight from the office windows glanced off Wolfe's globe and lit the papers like an accusation waiting for a signature. "Don't say I never bring gifts," Lon muttered, dropping the stack onto Wolfe's desk. Some of the pages fluttered open like hostile birds. Wolfe glared at the intrusion, his face set in the expression he reserves for unexpected vegetables. "Mr. Cohen, surely that is excessive." "Not by half," Lon said. "Wolfe, Archie, they're hammering Kramer, front page, above the fold, twice." I took the top paper. The headline screamed, "Kramer linked to the candidate's murder." Police silent. Another read, Cover-up in campaign killing, inspector at centre. Yet another, more dramatic still, NYPD's iron fist, or bloody hand. I whistled low. Lon, the Gazette prints more fiction than the Saturday Evening Post. He winced like I'd slapped him with a subscription card. Hey, I don't write the headlines. No, I said, flipping pages, but your people sure enjoy a good bonfire. Wolfe extended a hand for the paper. I gave it to him, and he read with the solemnity of a judge preparing to convict a pastry chef for burning crusts. His lips tightened. Shoddy. That's putting it gently, Lon said. Wolfe, the city's eating this up. You know how it works. An NYPD inspector with enemies. They'll run with it until someone dies or the truth proves boring. Truth is rarely boring, Wolfe said, but it lacks the spectacle people crave. Lon nodded grimly. The commissioner's rattled. The DA's office is jittery. Everyone's pointing fingers and Kramer's the easiest target. I picked up another paper, the Post this time, and scanned the front page. Tucked near the lower margin was a tiny, grainy photograph. The late Talbot, chin lifted, mid-argument with a man whose face was turned just enough to make identification infuriating. But I caught one detail, the glint of a boutonniere, a small white carnation fastened with a silver pin. Not common attire unless you were the kind of political peacock who added floral accessories to moral flexibility. That's interesting, I murmured. What is? Lon asked. This photo, I said, tapping it. Talbot arguing with someone at a fundraiser 2 nights before he died. And that boutonniere, I've seen it before. Lon squinted. You think that's Pierce, the Golden Boy candidate? Pierce, or the man Pierce hires to look decorative while breaking kneecaps. Lon looked uneasy. You didn't get this from me. Relax, I said. You can deny everything. You journalists are good at that. He sighed. Wolfe, I brought these so you'd understand how bad this is. If someone doesn't clear Kramer fast, he'll be slaughtered in public opinion. Public opinion, Wolfe said, should be strangled at birth. That's a quote, Lon muttered, pulling out a notebook. Don't you dare, I told him. Wolfe raised a brow. Archie, fetch Saul Panzer. I frowned. You know, you treat me like a homing pigeon. One of these days I'll wear feathers to make it official. At least, Wolfe replied. A pigeon would return with dispatch. Lon snorted. He got you there, Archie. I grabbed the phone, dialed Saul, and relayed the basics. The photo, the boutonniere, the need for quiet confirmation. Got it, Saul said. Give me an hour. Lon shifted his weight. Anything else you need from me? Yes, Wolfe said. Restraint. Tell your editors to soften the blows. Inspector Kramer is no murderer. Lon hesitated, then nodded. I'll try. He gathered his papers and left with a sigh heavy enough to bend the staircase railing. The moment he was gone, the office felt 10 degrees colder. I spread the newspapers across Wolfe's desk and scanned for anything useful. Most of it was speculation, filler, and enough anonymous sources to populate a conspiracy theory. I made note of the fundraiser date, the unidentified man's silhouette, and the angle of the shot. Archie, Wolfe said quietly, what do you surmise? That whoever snapped that photo liked shadows, and that the boutonniere is a calling card. Pierce's people wear them at public events, a show of unity or vanity. Wolfe pressed his fingers to his temples. Politics, he muttered, human frailty at scale. Before I could argue, the phone rang. I answered. Goodwin. Kramer's voice came through, tired, gravelly, but not furious. Archie, is Wolfe there? One moment, I handed the phone over. Inspector, Wolfe said, your voice has lost its tempest. Not by choice, Kramer answered. Listen, look, I'm sending you the autopsy summary. Don't ask how, you'll have it in 15 minutes. A generous gesture, Wolfe said, and he meant it. You were right, Kramer said quietly. Talbot died of a single blow, blunt object. Angle suggests someone taller than him, maybe 6'2", 6'3". A useful detail, Wolfe replied. Thank you. A pause. Then Kramer said what passed for affection in his dialect. Don't let me down. He hung up. I lifted my brows at Wolfe. Well, that's practically a love letter from Kramer. Wolfe ignored that. He tugged the bell cord. Fritz, coffee for Mr. Goodwin. Just for me? I asked. How touching. Your faculties, Wolfe said dryly, require periodic stimulation. Before I could deliver a retort, the phone rang again. Saul's voice was crisp. "Archie, I checked the fundraiser guest list and spoke to 2 contacts. The man in the photo, a contractor, name's Barclay Trent, does campaign cleanup, gives advice, makes problems disappear. Clean resume, dirty reputation." "Perfect," I said. "Anything else?" "One more thing," Saul said. "Remember those missing files from Talbot's safe?" "I remember." "Well," Saul continued, "someone's trying to sell them, quietly, through an underground broker. They're being shopped around like collector's items." That punched the air out of the room. "Saul, you sure?" "Yeah. I traced chatter from the hotel lobby near Times Square. Someone's dangling the documents looking for the highest bidder." "Hell," I muttered. "Keep on them, and don't let the seller see you." "Do I ever?" Saul hung up. I turned to Wolfe. "The missing files are up for sale." Wolfe's face froze, then settled into grim certainty. "Then we no longer pursue a mere thug." "No?" He lifted his chin. "We hunt a puppeteer." I leaned against the desk, letting that sink in. A puppeteer meant leverage, manipulation, and strings long enough to tangle half the city. "Wolfe," I said, "things just got uglier." "They were ugly already," he replied. "Now they are simply revealing their natural shape." He closed his eyes briefly, breathed, and then opened them with the calm of a man willing to drown cities if annoyed. I folded the newspapers, set them aside, and cracked my knuckles. "So what's next?" Wolfe reached for the phone. "Next, Archie, we arrange the board." The first thing that hit me when Ori and I stepped into the Silver Parrot was the smell, an aromatic blend of old cigars, cheap polish, and ambition gone rancid. Political fixers loved the place. It had enough shadows to host a séance and enough smoke to make the séance successful. The room was dim except for the neon parrot sign flickering above the bar like it was dying of heartbreak. If Manhattan had a basement for the men who whispered in candidates' ears, this was it. Ori adjusted his tie with the self-importance of a man who believed charm could compensate for lack of subtlety. "You're sure this is one of the places?" he asked. "Positive," I told him. "Talbot's contractor, our mysteriously fashionable tuxedo wearer, liked these joints, the kind of bars where a man in a nice suit fits right in until he doesn't." "Fine," Ori muttered. "I'll take the bar, you take the shadows." "Your natural environment," I said. He glared at me, then strolled toward the bar like he owned stock in it. I circled left, weaving between tables of men who pretended not to notice me. If political secrets had a smell, this room reeked of them. Behind the counter, a heavy-set bartender with hair slicked so tightly it could bounce bullets leaned toward Ori. Perfect. With Ori playing conversational bait, I slipped behind the bar, crouching low. A stack of ledgers sat near the register, brown, cracked, and suspiciously thick. I flipped the top one open. The entries were written in shorthand that would make a stenographer cry, but the names were clear enough. Trent, Pierce, Talbot, and a few I recognized from the recent campaign scandal columns. A payment marked Tuesday, 11:45 p.m. Trent meeting Talbot grabbed my attention. Late-night meetings don't happen for political strategy. Not at nearly midnight. That was blackmail hour. As I skimmed, my hand accidentally left one of my business cards between the pages. If the police ever raided this place, and knowing Kramer, it was a strong likelihood, the bartender would discover it and sweat like a roast duck in Wolfe's kitchen. Call it encouragement toward a future confession. Before I could read further, the bartender turned. I straightened, holding the ledger like a man who had every right to be there. "Hey," he barked, "that ain't for customers." "Relax," I said, setting it down. "I'm just checking the date. My friend over there thinks he was here last Tuesday." He frowned but didn't push it. Ori was now leaning in close, murmuring something about the Yankees and campaign rallies. The bartender returned to complain about ticket scalpers near the stadium. I slipped away with the grace of a man who'd practiced escaping worse situations. Back in the main room, Ori drifted over. "You get anything?" "Enough to make Wolfe choke on his beer," I said. "Our tuxedo man met Talbot late the night before the murder. Blackmail looks likely." "So what now?" "Now," I said, "we go to the next pit of sin." We hit 2 more joints, one with a jukebox that only played songs about heartbreak, the other with card tables populated by men who had never experienced remorse. We learned nothing new. Every bartender shrugged with the innocence of a choir boy, and every backroom clerk suddenly forgot how to speak English. At 12:17, in an alley near the last club, I hit a payphone and called Wolfe. "Report," he demanded. No greeting, no hello. Wolfe's charm offensive was on schedule. "Tuxedo Boy met Talbot at 11:45 the night before the murder," I said. "Looks like blackmail." "I see. And your location?" "A payphone behind a bar that smells like municipal corruption." "You should return immediately," Wolfe said. "Lunch approaches. Fritz is preparing stew." I glanced around the grimy alley. "Wolfe, we are chasing a murderer. Stew can wait." "Nonsense," he replied. "The mind rebels when deprived of sustenance." "Yours does," I said. "Mine seems to thrive on coffee and danger." "Pfui, I expect you in 40 minutes. He hung up. I sighed, hung up the receiver, and returned to Ori. But before I could speak, sirens pierced the air, echoing down the narrow alley behind the club. A squad car screamed around the corner, brakes shrieking. 2 uniforms jumped out and ran toward a dumpster. Ori and I joined them. Behind the dumpster lay a man, expensively dressed, tuxedo still immaculate except for the blood darkening his collar. His neck was crushed, throat twisted at a ghastly angle. His boutonniere, a white carnation, had fallen to the ground beside him. Our tuxedoed contractor, dead. I knelt beside him, careful not to disturb anything. "He was alive 2 hours ago," I murmured. Saul tailed him. "Then the killer was close," Ori said. "Closer than we liked." Footsteps pounded behind us. Inspector Kramer appeared, cigar clamped between his teeth, face drawn but controlled. He surveyed the scene with eyes that had seen too much. "Goodwin," he said, voice rough but steady. "You find him?" One of the uniforms had already ID'd him from his wallet. Barclay Trent, campaign contractor and professional fixer. "Not exactly," I said, "but we were on his trail. You got here fast." "Anonymous call," Kramer muttered. "Said a body was behind the club." Anonymous call. Too convenient. Kramer stepped beside me. His eyes shifted, not angry, but weary. "All right, Archie. What do you know?" I told him everything. The meeting with Talbot, the bars, the ledgers, the suspicion of blackmail. Kramer listened without interrupting. When I finished, he exhaled smoke like a dragon contemplating retirement. "Wolfe might be right," he said at last. "This isn't a simple killing. Someone's pulling strings, killing intermediaries." "And making you look guilty along the way," I said. He grunted. "Thanks for the reminder." Ori moved closer, whispering, "Archie, look." On the victim's cufflink glinted a tiny metal chip, almost invisible. A monogram, faint but legible. P.T. Pierce's initials. Red herring? Maybe, but a shiny one. Kramer straightened. "I want Wolfe's thoughts on this. And fast. Tell him I'll share anything I get from the ME." That counted as professional respect and a recognition of Wolfe's value. "Will do," I said. As the uniforms cordoned off the alley, Kramer lingered a moment, staring at the body. "They're killing off anyone who knows something," he said quietly. "Goodwin, if I'm next." "You won't be," I interrupted. He nodded once. Then he turned and walked away without theatrics. When he was gone, I looked at the corpse again. The crushed throat, the expensive suit, the boutonniere fallen in the dirt. Someone was killing their own messengers. I stood. "Ori, let's call Wolfe." "What do you think he'll say?" "That lunch is ready," I replied. But inside, a cold realization hit me like a shove. Kramer's name might be the next one to appear on a note. I stepped back into the street, the city humming with danger, and flagged a cab toward the brownstone, carrying the weight of a second dead man and the sense that this case had just twisted into something far uglier than blackmail. The elevator that carried me to the 20th floor of the Pierce for DA campaign headquarters had the serene hum of machinery accustomed to hauling oversized egos. I'd ridden in elevators with less attitude. When the doors slid open, the air that greeted me had been filtered, perfumed and combed into submission. The carpeting stretched out like a red carpet reconsidering its life choices. Everything was immaculate, sleek, polished, faintly smug. It was the kind of office where a man could lose his conscience and have the janitor return it neatly folded. 2 receptionists sat behind a chrome desk the length of a small yacht. They gave me identical looks, polite suspicion with a garnish of disdain. Their matching coiffures suggested a policy manual on hair consistency. "I'm here to see Mr. Pierce," I said, smiling in my best "I'm harmless unless you provoke me" fashion. Do you have an appointment? The left receptionist asked, voice cool enough to refrigerate produce. No, but tell him Archie Goodwin is here, I replied. He'll either let me in or call the police. Either way, I'll find my way. Both women stiffened. After exchanging a telepathic conference, Lefty picked up the phone. Mr. Goodwin from Mr. Wolfe. Her tone dipped, as if the name carried a contagious legal condition. After a moment, she hung up. You may go in. I walked through a corridor lined with framed campaign photos, pierced with veterans, pierced with schoolchildren, pierced with enough handshakes to warrant a wrist brace. The deeper I went, the quieter things became. Politics likes its silence padded and well-dressed. Pierce's private suite was enormous, with furniture that probably cost more than my weekly salary, and I don't earn peanuts. He stood near the window, staring at Manhattan as though he expected to inherit it by lunchtime. Tall, composed, handsome in a way that made voters swoon and cynics gag. His suit was tailored tighter than his smile. Mr. Goodwin, he said, turning. I've heard of you. I get that a lot, I replied, usually right before someone slams a door. He didn't smile. To what do I owe the intrusion? Information, I said, stepping inside. And curiosity. Your campaign has been dancing awfully close to the fire since Talbot died. He gestured to a chair with a precision that belonged on a blueprint. Sit. I sat. He didn't. You're investigating, he said, on Wolfe's orders. On Wolfe's assignment, I corrected. Orders are for people who eat lunch at their desks. He exhaled through his nose. What do you want? A look around, I said. Your office. Talbot dealt with someone who wore a boutonniere like yours. That makes your headquarters relevant. His jaw twitched. Don't imply things you can't prove, Goodwin. I don't imply, I said mildly. I observe. And what I observe here is money, clean, crisp, and layered over something sour. His eyes hardened. Be careful. I am, I said, smiling. That's why I'm still alive. He walked to his desk. Everything was arranged with the precision of a man terrified of disorder, and on one corner, gleaming like a proud relic, sat a rare typewriter, the same make and model that produced the note accusing Kramer. Well now, I murmured. Pierce followed my gaze. A gift, he said, from a supporter. Nice supporter. Shame their ribbon was halfway to retirement. He didn't answer. I approached the typewriter. New ribbon, crisp black. In the wastebasket, a scrap of the old ribbon, frayed, brittle, accusing. I tapped the keys lightly. Mind if I type something, for comparison? He hesitated. That alone told me volumes. If you must. I fed in a clean sheet and typed a harmless line. The quick brown fox had better pay his taxes. I removed the page, folded it, and slid it into my jacket. Pierce's eyes sharpened. You think I wrote that note accusing Kramer? I think whoever used this machine did, I said, and whoever tossed that worn ribbon had something to hide. He said nothing. The silence grew long, thin, and dangerous. To break it, I ambled toward a bookshelf filled with political theory, leadership essays, and books with his own face on the dust jacket. You run a tight ship, I said lightly. Shame someone keeps drilling holes in the hull. His facade cracked for the briefest second. Fear, not anger. Mr. Goodwin, I didn't kill Talbot. I didn't set Kramer up. I know how it looks, but I... A knock interrupted him. One of the assistants poked her head inside. Sir, the press is waiting. Tell them to wait, he snapped. She flinched and withdrew. Pierce turned back to me. His voice dropped. Leave this alone. Not a chance, I said, but thanks for the invitation. He stepped closer. Too close. If you push this, you'll ruin me. I held his gaze. Then I guess we'll find out what you're worth when the shine wears off. That was enough to end the conversation. He dismissed me with a jerk of his head. Outside, the receptionist stared as if I'd escaped from a quarantine ward. I waved cheerfully and walked back to the elevator. As soon as I hit the street, I ducked into a drugstore and used their payphone. Wolfe answered on the first ring. Report. I found a friend, I said. A typewriter friend. Same model as the one that coughed up the note blaming Kramer. Old ribbon in the trash, new ribbon installed, and Pierce getting jittery. You took a sample? I typed a line myself. If that ribbon speaks English, we'll know soon. There was a pause, then a cold, precise voice. You are late. I'm alive, I countered, And busy. Lunch will have to survive without me." "Mr. Goodwin," Wolfe said, "your resourcefulness is not a license to impugn him. Inspector Kramer questioned you earlier, did he not?" "He poked at me," I said. "That's different." "I told him," Wolfe said, "that your actions, though occasionally brash, are never reckless." I blinked. That was Wolfe's version of hugging me. "Well, thanks," I said. "Try not to faint." "Return immediately," he said. "We have another matter." "Saul?" I guessed. "Yes, he has identified the underground broker selling the missing files." "The bookseller?" "An elderly one," Wolfe confirmed. "A dealer in political dirt." "Lovely hobby." "Your levity," Wolfe said, "is unbecoming." "And your affection is showing," I shot back. He hung up. I flagged a cab and made for the brownstone. When I arrived, Fritz was setting the dining room with the reverence of a man preparing a shrine. He glanced at me. "Mr. Goodwin, Mr. Wolfe is in the office. He is displeased." "Nothing new," I said. I entered the office. Wolfe's bulk was planted in his chair like a monarch awaiting tribute. "You are late," he repeated. "Traffic," I said. And the candidate needed a pep talk. Wolfe's eyes narrowed. "Explain." I handed him the typed page and described the typewriter, the ribbon, the office tension. He listened without interrupting, though his fingers drummed once, Wolfe's version of pacing. When I finished, he said, "The candidate is frightened." "Of being accused?" I asked. "No," Wolfe said. "Of something the victim knew." I sat. "What?" "That," he said, "we must discover." Before I could respond, the phone rang. Wolfe gestured for me to answer. "Goodwin," Saul's voice came through, soft but crisp. "Archie, the bookseller confirmed it. The missing files are for sale. Someone's auctioning them to the highest bidder." My stomach dipped. "And the seller?" "Careful," Saul said. "Older man, tweed coat, nervous, but he's scared of someone, very scared." "I'll come meet you." "No," Saul said. "Watch yourself. This is bigger than we thought." I hung up, turned to Wolfe. "The files are in play." Wolfe closed his eyes briefly. "The candidate fears exposure." "And that makes him dangerous," I said. Wolfe shook his head. "No, it makes him vulnerable." I leaned back, absorbing that. The city was tightening around the man, and yet he wasn't fighting the accusation. He was terrified of something deeper. Wolfe lifted his chin. "We proceed," he said. "Where?" I asked. "To the truth," he replied. It wasn't a rousing speech, but coming from Wolfe it counted as battle cry. I stood. "What now?" "Now," Wolfe said, reaching for the bell cord, "we eat." And just like that, the scene closed on the brownstone, not with relief, but with the steady hum of danger circling the man who might become DA, if he survived long enough. By the time I reached the antique bookshop, I had already counted 3 fire escapes, 2 suspicious shadows, and 1 man who pretended not to tail me. A good sign. When the dirt merchants of Manhattan start sniffing around, it means you're close to something rotten enough to interest collectors. The shop itself sat wedged between a shuttered tailor and a bakery that smelled like the inside of a defeated dream. Its sign, Brenning and Comber Rare Books, hung crooked, swaying like a drunk fencing with gravity. I stepped inside. The door gave a wheeze suggesting arthritis. The place smelled of yellowed pages, mildew, dust, and the faint metallic tang of desperation. Shelves rose in narrow aisles that bent and twisted as if the architect had been paid in expired whiskey. If the Library of Congress had a nightmare, this was it. A frail voice drifted from deeper in the maze. "Close the door. You're letting the air in." "I thought you might appreciate some circulation," I said. "This place hasn't breathed since Prohibition." "Nor have many who cross my threshold," the voice replied. I made my way through the labyrinth until I reached a dimly lit alcove. The bookseller sat hunched behind a counter cluttered with codices, brittle newspaper clippings, and a brass lamp fighting for its life. He looked like a skeleton that had decided to try living again out of boredom. His eyebrows were 2 snowy arcs ready to slide off his face. "You are Mr. Goodwin," he said without preamble. "And you," I said, "are the man who sells secrets between bookworms." He lifted his chin. "Words are eternal. Corruption is predictable. Paper is safer than people." "That's poetic," I said. "Almost makes me sentimental." He didn't blink. You are here about the files. I might be, I replied. Depends on what you know. Everything, he said softly. But how much I share depends on how little you annoy me. Well, I said, that puts us both in danger. He gestured vaguely toward a rickety stool. I sat, brushing off dust thick enough to qualify as insulation. I was approached, he said, to facilitate the sale of certain documents. Political documents. Sensitive ones. Talbot's files, I said. Yes, a full set. And the buyer? I never saw a face, the bookseller said. Only hands, and a badge. A badge? A campaign volunteer badge, he murmured, from Talbot's organisation. That knocked me back an inch. An inside job. Someone working directly under the victim. A volunteer badge meant access, free access, unnoticed in the chaos of campaign frenzy. What else, Bahar? I asked. The buyer wanted one file destroyed entirely, not sold. And which file was that? The bribery report, the one implicating a rising political star. Pierce, I said. The bookseller's eyes glinted. Names are your department, Mr. Goodwin. I only recognize patterns, and this pattern is old. People with power fear paper. People without power weaponize it. Comforting worldview. Realistic, he corrected. I remembered the cobwebs overhead. I haven't seen this many webs since Wolfe asked me to clean the attic in 43. The bookseller didn't laugh. My humour had landed in a vacuum. Why come forward? I asked. I dislike murder, he said simply. Bad for business. And someone is killing loose ends. His gaze fixed on me. Be careful. You're becoming a loose end. That's not on my schedule, I said. He opened a drawer and slid out a fragment of paper, torn, yellowed, with only a few typed characters visible. A sample, he said. From the lot the buyer rejected for destruction, I thought, insurance. I examined it. The texture matched the accusation note, another piece of the puzzle. As I left the shop, the bell above the door screeched like it was tattling on me. Outside, the sky hung low, blurred by smog and unspoken threats. I found a payphone near a drugstore and dialed Wolfe. He answered with his usual charm. Report. The bookseller confirmed it, I said. Volunteer badge from Talbot's campaign. One file the buyer wanted burned, the bribery report, and I've got a sample of the original paper. Pfui, Wolfe muttered. You disapprove? I detest bribery. It is corruption without elegance, as predictable as mildew. Well, I said, mildew at least smells better. That, Wolfe said, is debatable. He also said I'm becoming a loose end. That is not acceptable, Wolfe said quietly. That tone meant something. Wolfe could tolerate murderers, liars, politicians, and even me, but not threats to one of his own. Want me home, I asked. Yes. On my way. I hung up, flagged a cab, and contemplated whether I'd survive long enough to pay the fare. When I arrived at the brownstone, Fritz opened the door. Mr. Goodwin, he said, looking me over like I'd wrestled a chimney. Mr. Wolfe is waiting. In a good mood? I asked. No, Fritz said, not remotely. In the office, Wolfe sat planted in his chair like an immovable idea. Kramer was there too, standing stiffly, hands clasped behind him as if trying not to strangle the nearest piece of furniture. Goodwin, Kramer grunted. Wolfe says you've got something. More than you'll enjoy hearing, I said. The missing files were almost sold. Someone with a volunteer badge approached an underground broker, and they wanted the bribery report destroyed. Kramer's jaw clenched. Figures. Oh, and this, I added, handing Wolfe the paper scrap. He examined it, nostrils flaring slightly. Talbot's campaign used this paper stock. Expensive. Pretentious. Kramer exhaled smoke. The lab finished the autopsy on the contractor. And, I asked, he was killed by someone left-handed. Strong grip. Crushing strength. I nodded slowly. Pierce's security chief. Exactly what I'm thinking, Kramer said. Wolfe sighed. Inspector, do not leap, the path is tangled. Kramer actually nodded. I didn't say he did it, just that he could. And many could, Wolfe replied. Political campaigns attract ambition in all its malignant forms. Kramer turned to me. Goodwin, watch your back. Whoever's playing puppeteer isn't done. And you? I asked. He snorted. I don't die easy. He moved toward the door, then paused. Wolfe, thanks for the earlier backing. Wolfe inclined his head. I merely told the truth. Kramer left with a quiet dignity that made the room feel heavier. I turned to Wolfe. That was almost cordial. Wolfe raised a brow. Do not be absurd. I paced. So now we know. Inside Talbot's campaign, someone wanted that bribery report erased. Someone with access. Someone willing to kill intermediaries. And to frame Inspector Kramer, Wolfe added. This is not linear. No, I said. It's triangular. Wolfe nodded once, firm and solemn. Correct. 3 points. Talbot's campaign, Pierce's ascent, and the unseen manipulator. And the volunteer badge, I asked. An entry point, Wolfe said. The office felt colder than it should have. The conspiracy wasn't a simple chain, it was a triangle. Stable, strong, difficult to topple without careful force. I sank into a chair. So what's next? Wolfe leaned back, steepling his fingers. Now, Mr. Goodwin, we pull at all 3 corners. And just like that, the scene closed. Not with victory, but with the silent knowledge that the case had grown fangs. The kid looked guilty before I even reached the campaign office door. Guilty in that specific Manhattan way where a man seems to worry the sidewalk might ask him a question he can't answer. I spotted him through the glass. Pale, narrow shoulders, fingers twitching like he was rehearsing excuses in Morse code. Volunteers were supposed to have enthusiasm, not tremors. This one had both in the wrong proportions. Inside, the headquarters buzzed with the frantic energy of people trying to pretend they were helping. Phones rang, papers shuffled, and the posters of the almost DA candidate stared down with the serene confidence of a man who wasn't doing the actual work. I threaded through the chaos and tapped the jittery kid on the shoulder. Morning, I said. You look like someone stole your lunch money. He flinched hard enough to spill a stack of leaflets. I didn't expect an actual human to speak to you, I asked. Happens sometimes. I'm Archie Goodwin. He swallowed. I know. Of course he did. My name had probably been passed around this office with the warmth of a dental appointment reminder. I have some questions, I said cheerfully. And if you cooperate, I promise I won't ask you to do anything strenuous like thinking too hard. That didn't calm him. We went into an empty storage room, still perfumed with the scent of ink and stale ambition. Boxes of campaign material towered around us. Perfect place to interrogate a man who already looked like he might faint from a stern breeze. So, I began, leaning against a crate labelled Voter Outreach. What's your job around here? He tugged his sleeve. Printing, leaflets, posters. I don't handle donor stuff or meetings, I just run the machines. Machines? I repeated. Typewriter machines. His eyes widened. No, I mean printing presses. You know, the basement area. I do, I said, watching him twitch. Tell me about the accusation note. He blinked. I didn't write it. That's nice, I said. I didn't ask if you wrote it. He went pale. I opened a box and pretended to inspect pamphlets. Look, kid, let's do this the easy way. You handled printing for the campaign, you probably typed leaflets, schedules, press releases. So humor me. Did you type anything unusual? Anonymous? Something that wasn't supposed to be in the official pile? No, he whispered. I smiled. Do you always lie this badly, or is today special? His eyes flicked to the door. I'm telling the truth. Sure, I said, and I'm the mayor of Honolulu. Look, level with me. I know someone delivered a typed accusation to the crime scene. I know the typewriter was here, and I know amateurs always leave fingerprints, literal or metaphorical. He hunched inward. That's when I spotted it, a red burn in the shape of a circular metal cap, right on the top of his right hand. Fresh, angry, ugly. Nice scar, I said. You should sue whoever told you crime doesn't get you burned. He yanked his hand back. It's nothing. Uh-huh. That burn matches the safe lamp Talbot kept in his office, the one used during the break-in, the one the cops noticed was still warm hours after the body was found. He shook his head rapidly. I don't know anything about a safe, I just run the presses. I didn't believe that for a second, and I needed a scalpel, not a hammer. Wolfe's voice floated into my mind, precise, annoyed, calm. Mr. Goodwin, you must direct the subject like a surgeon, not a drummer. Fine. Time to let the big man participate. I reached for the phone on the wall, dialed the brownstone, and when Wolfe answered with his usual growl disguised as a greeting, I said, "I'm with a volunteer, the one with the tremble and confess posture." "Proceed," Wolfe said. "Questions?" I asked. "Yes," Wolfe said. "Ask what he heard the night of Talbot's last meeting." I covered the receiver. "What did you hear the night Talbot had his last meeting?" The volunteer stiffened. I wasn't near the office," Wolfe murmured through the line. "He lies. Narrow the time frame. Include sensory detail." "Between 8 and 10, I said. "Did you hear anything? Voices shouting? You run the basement presses. You must have been around." The kid hesitated just long enough to confirm guilt. "I heard something," he admitted. "Raised voices." "Whose?" I asked. I didn't see. I just heard shouting." "Male or female?" "Two men," he whispered. "Talbot and who else?" He wrung his hands. "The accountant." That was a twist. And a bad one. A red herring if ever I saw one, but a well-crafted one. If this kid was lying, someone coached him. I uncovered the receiver. "He says it was the accountant." "Not credible," Wolfe said. "Push further." "Why lie about that?" I demanded. "I'm not lying," the kid said. "I swear, I heard Talbot arguing with the accountant about missing numbers." His voice cracked. If he was faking, he deserved an award. The room tightened around us. Ink and paper claustrophobia. "Next," Wolfe said, smooth as a guillotine blade. "Ask about the stairwell." "Police logs," I said to the kid. "Show you had access to the stairwell where the mystery man was last seen exiting. Why were you there?" His face froze. I was taking boxes down." "Boxes containing what?" "Leaflets," he whispered. "Try again." "I swear," he said. "I didn't see anyone. I didn't know." He broke off. His breathing sped up, never a good sign. He bolted. He hit the door before I could grab him, sprinted through the office, dodged 2 interns and 3 paper stacks, and burst out onto the sidewalk like a man fleeing a ghost with better stamina. I ran after him. Cold Manhattan air slapped me in the face. The kid darted down the block, weaving between pedestrians who shouted insults at both of us. He hit the corner, skidded, recovered, and kept going. He was faster than he looked. Panic makes good fuel. "Kid," I yelled, "if you collapse, I'm not carrying you." He didn't slow. I chased him past a diner, a florist, and a shoe repair shop. He stumbled once, regained footing, then stumbled again, and this time collapsed entirely. I reached him just as he hit the pavement, trembling like a taut wire ready to snap. "Easy," I said, kneeling. "You're not dying. You're panicking." His breath came in sharp bursts. I didn't kill him." "Good," I said. "That makes 2 of us." He grabbed my sleeve with desperate strength. "I didn't kill him," he repeated, voice barely coherent. I just delivered the note." That froze the street. "Delivered?" I asked. "To who?" He shook his head violently. I shouldn't." "Kid," I said, tightening my grip. "You don't get to choose anymore." He squeezed his eyes shut. "I only slipped it under the door. I swear. I didn't write it." This was worse than lying. It was truth. Raw, panicked, miserable truth. "Who gave it to you?" I pressed. He shook, unable to form the words. I pulled him upright. "Kid, listen. If you don't talk now, someone else dies. Maybe Kramer. Maybe someone in your own office. Who handed you that note?" He stared at me, eyes huge, terrified, swimming with shame, then crumpled again. "I can't," he whispered. "They'll kill me." "Who?" I demanded, but he didn't answer. And as I looked down at him, trembling in the gutter, I realized the worst part of the confession. Whoever the puppeteer was, they weren't just using the campaign volunteers. They were hunting them. And this terrified kid was next on the list. The volunteer sat in Wolfe's red chair like a man awaiting both judgment and a stomachache. His knees knocked together so loudly I half expected Wolfe to complain about the noise. It wasn't every day a trembling campaign flunky got a front row seat to one of Wolfe's interrogations, a performance usually reserved for people with sturdier constitutions. The office lights were low, the air thick with the faint scent of orchids drifting from upstairs, and the only sound, aside from the volunteer's panicked breathing, was the soft thud of Wolfe settling deeper into his chair, ready to begin the intellectual dissection. I took up my station behind the volunteer, just close enough for him to feel my presence and just far enough to keep his nerves from detonating. Fritz entered with a tray, 2 coffees, steaming, elegant. Fritz never trembled. He set the tray on Wolfe's desk and left with the dignity of a man who refused to acknowledge chaos unless it disrupted dinner service. Wolfe gestured. "Mr. Goodwin, give the young man a cup." I handed the volunteer a cup. His hands shook so violently the spoon rattled like a wind chime in a hurricane. I leaned down and murmured, "Try not to faint into the rug. We'll never get the stains out." The volunteer gave a strangled sound between a gasp and a sob. Wolfe didn't glance at me, but his tone tightened. "Then stand him upright, Archie." The kid sat straighter instantly. Good. Terrified men were easier to steer when they stopped sloshing. Wolfe began. "Your name?" "David," he whispered. "Mr. David," Wolfe said, "you will answer all questions truthfully. If you withhold, distort, or panic, Mr. Goodwin will correct your course, firmly." David nodded so quickly I worried he'd dislocate his neck. Wolfe continued, his voice a steady metronome. "You delivered the note that accused Inspector Kramer of murder. You did not write it. Who paid you to deliver it?" David's hands shook uncontrollably, his body language betraying the panic that had simmered since his arrival. "Pfui," Wolfe said. "You can." David swallowed hard. "It was the security chief, Mr. Rourke." I stiffened. Rourke, the left-handed bulldozer who shepherded Pierce through crowds like a bull guiding a ballerina. He had motive, muscle, opportunity, the whole sordid bouquet. Wolfe's brow dipped, pleased and irritated at once. "You will elaborate?" David nodded frantically. "He found me near the print room. He said if I delivered the note to the campaign office, Talbot's office, and slid it under the door before the police arrived, I'd get paid. He said it was just political leverage, just theatre." "And you believed him?" I asked. I didn't think anyone would die," David squeaked. "I didn't know." Wolfe raised a hand, silencing the echo. "Continue." David clutched the cup like a lifeline. "The contractor, the man in the tuxedo, he found out. He said he'd expose everything. Rourke told him to stay quiet. They argued in the loading bay the day before he was killed. That matched our earlier threads, and the knot tightened." "And Talbot?" Wolfe asked. "What did he know?" "He saw the bribery report," David whispered. He was furious. He said Pierce's people were corrupt. He was going to expose it before the election. He said he didn't care who burned. "And then," Wolfe said, "someone burned him." David nodded miserably. Wolfe leaned back, fingers steepled, a pose I recognized as the moment before revelation, though this time he held it in reserve. "You delivered the note. Why?" "Rourke threatened me," David choked. "He said I'd lose everything, my job, my family's insurance, if I didn't do it. I just slipped it under the door. I didn't know Talbot was dead." "And after that?" Wolfe asked, vowed. "I ran," David whispered. "I wanted to quit, but I knew too much." That was the truth. Panic had scrubbed away his capacity to lie with finesse. I circled around him, slow and deliberate. "You're not the brains of this operation, kid. You're more like the messenger. The real masterminds wanted that bribery file gone," silenced Talbot, and made sure Kramer was framed. David nodded, trembling more violently now. "Rourke said it would all blow over. He said the note would just distract the police long enough." "Long enough for what?" Wolfe asked sharply. David flinched. "To get the files sold. To get them out of the city before anyone traced them back to Pierce's people." Wolfe's jaw tightened. "Political puppetry," he muttered, invisible hands pulling visible strings. I knew that tone. Wolfe was assembling the final shape. The pattern, the symmetry, the trap. Before Wolfe could press further, the doorbell rang. Fritz appeared in the doorway. "Inspector Kramer," Wolfe sighed. "Admit him." Kramer entered wearing an expression carved from fatigue and determination. His hat was pushed back a fraction, cigar stub clinging to the side of his mouth like a stubborn barnacle. He surveyed the room, the trembling volunteer, Wolfe poised like a judge, me looming behind the kid. "Hell," he muttered. "What did I walk into?" "A confession," Wolfe said simply. "Sit." Kramer remained standing. "I've got news." "So do we," I said, "but you first." He reached into his coat and withdrew a small evidence envelope. "Lab just finalized their report. The ribbon fibers on the accusation note match a rare ribbon type. Only 3 typewriters in Manhattan use it." Wolfe prompted, "And?" Kramer met his eyes. One of them is in Pierce's office. David groaned faintly, as if his bones were collapsing. That confirms it, I said. Pierce's people, specifically Rourke, planted the note. Maybe, Kramer said. But Rourke's not smart enough to tie shoelaces without supervision. Someone else orchestrated this whole mess. Indeed, Wolfe murmured. We now have the final points of the triangle. Kramer blinked. Triangle? Wolfe ignored him. Mr. Goodwin, summaries. I stepped forward. Talbot found the bribery report, planned to expose Pierce's corruption. Rourke bribed and threatened David here to plant a note framing Kramer. The contractor found out and was silenced. Talbot was then killed when he refused to play along. The files were sent into circulation, ready to be sold, unless Wolfe or Kramer intervened. Kramer exhaled sharply. Fine, but who's the mastermind? Pierce? The accountant? Someone on Talbot's side? Wolfe closed his eyes. The answer is complete, I frowned. If it's complete, why isn't it clear? Wolfe opened one eye and glared at me with affectionate exasperation. Because, Archie, clarity requires arrangement, order, presentation. You favour chaos unless induced otherwise. I grinned. You say the sweetest things. Kramer stepped closer to the volunteer. Kid, if you're lying, he is not, Wolfe snapped. He is pathetic, frightened, and morally brittle, but he is not lying. David whimpered in agreement. Wolfe rose, slowly with effort, but with a presence that filled the room. Inspector, Mr. Goodwin, we now require all principals, all of them. I knew that tone. The orchestration was beginning, the stage being built, the truth ready to be unveiled with Wolfe's signature disdain for inefficiency. Archie, Wolfe said, you will summon the candidate, his security chief, the accountant, the campaign manager, and you will bring the volunteer here, anyone whose hands touch this sordid affair. All of them? I asked. Yes, Wolfe said, tonight. Kramer rubbed his forehead. A showdown. A reckoning, Wolfe corrected. If you're wrong, Kramer said quietly, I'll be crucified. You will not be wrong, Wolfe replied. I will not permit it. There was the protectiveness again. Quiet, unspoken, steel beneath silk. I stepped toward the door. I'll make the calls. David whimpered again. What happens to me? You, Wolfe said, will remain here under Mr. Goodwin's supervision. Great, I muttered, babysitting, my glamorous life. Wolfe ignored me, already turning inward, mind arranging pieces on the mental chessboard where he always played 5 moves ahead of everyone else. Kramer headed for the door, then paused. Wolfe, I don't say this lightly, but thank you. Wolfe inclined his head. It is premature to thank me. Still, Kramer said, you're the only one treating me like I'm not already guilty. You are not guilty, Wolfe said, merely exhausted. Kramer gave a humorless snort and left. I followed him out, ready to gather the city's most unwilling audience for the Brownstones' grand finale. Behind me, Wolfe's voice drifted. Archie, ensure they all arrive. Or what? I called back. Or, Wolfe said, I will be displeased. That was enough to freeze blood in warmer men than me. The trap was set. Tonight, the puppeteer would dance. At 8:11 that evening, the office felt less like a room and more like a pressure cooker that had misplaced the release valve. Wolfe had ordered the big red chairs moved into a loose semicircle facing his desk, which made it plain who was conducting and who was expected to sing. Fritz had drawn the curtains. The lamplight gave everything a flat, yellowed look, as if the whole show were being staged on old newsprint. We had all the players. On the left sat Milton Grady, accountant, spine-stiff, hands folded like he was about to balance the books on Judgment Day. Next came Ms. Hartley, campaign manager, mouth tight, eyes sharp enough to perforate ballot boxes. Centre position went to Marlin Pierce, the almost DA, polished to within an inch of his soul and wearing a suit that should have been up for election itself. Beside him loomed Rourke, the security chief, left-handed, heavy-shouldered, expression carved from stone. At the far end, trying to become smaller than air, perched David the volunteer, pale and shivering. Inspector Kramer stood near the bookshelves, arms folded across his chest, a solid, unsmiling block in a suit that had seen better precincts. He was there as law, not defendant, but the newspapers outside had shoved him close enough to the edge that nobody had forgotten his name on the note. Wolfe sat behind his desk, planted and immense, fingertips together over the blotter. Spread in front of him like surgical tools were the accusation note, the scrap of typewriter ribbon, photostats of Talbot's appointment pages, and a narrow strip from the bookseller's sample paper. One neat index card lay alone in front of him, written in Wolfe's tidy hand. He'd refused to let me see what was on it, which meant it contained either the final answer or a recipe Fritz wasn't allowed to know about. I took my usual station by the globe, where I could see faces, exits, and sudden decisions. It was close enough to 8:30 that Fritz would be thinking about dinner. That put a quiet limit on how long Wolfe intended to indulge stupidity. He began without throat clearing. "You are wondering why you are here," he said. "Some of you have protested, some have attempted to ignore my invitation. None of that matters. 2 men are dead, a city office is at risk, and an honest inspector has been slandered. Those conditions are intolerable." Pierce shifted forward. "Mr. Wolfe, this assembly is highly irregular. I am a candidate for—" "Yes," Wolfe said, "and a man. Sit and be one." Hartley bristled. "You have no authority to hold us here." "On the contrary," Wolfe answered lazily, "I have Inspector Kramer, who is sufficient. If that offends, address your grievance to him." Kramer's mouth twitched around his cigar. "I'm listening," he said. No one volunteered. Wolfe picked up the accusation note between 2 fingers. "We begin with this. A clumsy attempt to accuse Mr. Kramer of Talbot's murder. It was typed on a rare ribbon. The laboratory has matched that ribbon stock to the typewriter in Mr. Pierce's private office." Pierce's jaw locked. "That machine is used by my staff. Anyone could—" "Yes," Wolfe said. "That is why one hires staff to do what one prefers not to touch. The ribbon was replaced after this note was typed. The exhausted ribbon, torn away, found its way to a wastebasket. A fragment reached a bookseller's hands." He indicated the narrow strip. "Its torn edge matches perfectly the torn edge of the note's ribbon. That connection is factual, not conjectural." Rourke snorted. "So somebody used our machine. That doesn't make us killers." "No," Wolfe agreed. "It makes you clumsy conspirators. Murder required other tools." I said, "Don't worry, Rourke. He'll get to those in a minute. Try not to run until we finish the program." David flinched at Rourke's side. The kid's hand still showed the round burn from Talbot's safe lamp. He kept trying to hide it against his knee, with all the success of a man trying to misplace his nose. "David," Wolfe said, turning his head slightly, "you delivered this note." The boy swallowed. Yes." "Who paid you?" He darted a glance at Rourke, then dropped his eyes. "Mr. Rourke gave me $50. He said it was just political theatre, to shake up the police. He said no one would be hurt." "That," Wolfe said, "was the first lie." Hartley hissed, "You imbecile." Rourke's jaw bunched. "The kid's scared. He'll say anything you prod him into." "Phooey," Wolfe murmured. "Mr. Goodwin, did you prod him?" "Only with facts," I said. "They bruise easily." Wolfe went on. "We know Talbot's safe was emptied after his death. The missing files went to an underground broker. Among them was a report detailing a bribery pattern tied to Mr. Pierce's campaign. Someone requested that one report be destroyed rather than sold. That request came from the same quarter that used this office typewriter to frame Mr. Kramer. The purpose was to remove leverage, silence Talbot, and cripple the investigation." Pierce's face had lost some of its campaign gloss. "I never ordered bribes. I never ordered destruction of any report. If someone did this in my name—" "They did it for your benefit," Wolfe said. "That is not the same thing. Your guilt is moral, not legal. Others have been more industrious." He shifted his gaze to Rourke. "You, sir, were industrious. You arranged for David to deliver the note. You met the contractor in the alley behind the theatre club. You followed Talbot's movements, and you had the strength and training to crush a man's throat with your left hand." "Plenty of left-handers in this town," Rourke growled. "Try again." "Few with your resume," Wolfe said, "and fewer with access to all 3 points. Talbot's headquarters, the broker, and this office machine. You convenience yourself too often." Grady unexpectedly cleared his throat. "I never meant harm," he blurted. "Talbot asked me to hold back some numbers. Delay filing that report. I did it, yes, but only to give him time to rethink. I thought he'd settle it politically." "There," Wolfe told me, "is your misleading element, Archie. Mr. Grady tampered with time, not with lives. He is guilty of timidity and bad judgment. He will be chastened, not caged." "That's a relief," I said. "Cell walls are hell on ledgers." Hartley glared at all of us. "You are ruining careers with gossip." "No," Wolfe said. "We are untangling a sequence. Allow me." First, he counted on his fingers. Talbot discovers the bribery report and decides to expose it. Second, Mr. Grady delays, hoping to avoid scandal. Third, someone from Mr. Pierce's circle seeks an outside agent, a contractor accustomed to clean up, to silence Talbot if persuasion fails. Fourth, the contractor balked, his eyes darting for an exit he knew wasn't there. Then he threatened to spill the whole mess, but only if he was backed into a corner. Fifth, Mr. Rourke removes him, by strangulation, in an alley convenient for disposal. Sixth, to discredit the police and distract the public, Mr. Rourke hires David to plant a note accusing Inspector Kramer, typed on a machine in this office and using a distinctive ribbon whose remnants betray him. Seventh, the stolen files are offered quietly for sale, with one report marked for destruction. Silence followed that list the way dust follows demolition. Kramer spoke at last. "Can you put any of that in front of a jury, Wolfe?" "Yes," Wolfe said simply. Saul Panzer tailed Mr. Rourke from the hotel where the contractor was last seen to the alley where the body was found. The bookseller will testify about the ribbon and the attempted sale. David will testify about the payment and the instructions. The laboratory will confirm the ribbon stock. The medical examiner will describe the left-handed grip. That is more than adequate. Rourke stood up. "You're crazy if you think—" Kramer was ready. He moved in 2 steps, hand going to his cuffs. "Sit down, Rourke, or do it in irons." For a heartbeat I thought Rourke might charge him. His eyes flicked to Pierce, who was staring at him with something like horror, then to Hartley, who had turned away. Finding no friends, he settled for a snarl. "You're throwing away a campaign," he told Pierce. "I kept the dirt off you." Pierce whispered, "You buried people to do it." "That is enough," Wolfe snapped. "You mistake loyalty for license. They are not the same." I added, "And next time you frame a cop, try not to use office supplies with personality. Some of us notice." Even Kramer's mouth twitched at that. Rourke swore, but the fight had gone out of him. Kramer stepped behind and snapped the cuffs on with a click that sounded very final. "You're under arrest," Kramer said, voice steady, "for the murders of Arthur Talbot and Barclay Trent, and for conspiracy to obstruct justice." Kramer thanked Wolfe in a flat, tired voice, and Wolfe's small nod settled it. Fritz announced dinner, beer waited, and I settled in at the brownstone, smiling into the night.